If you don't like the interpretations that your mind is giving you, how do you get out of this syndrome of, why is this happening to me again? It's only one way. We're back to it again. Forgiveness. We've got to learn to untie, to let loose of our past in order to get to a different experience of life. If we must turn to our past for every meaning, that means that our minds have been molded by the world. Those who warned us, be not conformed to the world, or don't let your mind be molded by the world, what did they give us as an option? They said, let the Spirit mold you. Go to your spiritual nature. And as you go to your spiritual nature, you will start to build a whole new past, a whole new mindset. And as you do, the meanings you experience in life, the reality, which is your own individual interpretation of every event, will totally change. When you start to put accurate information into the mind, then with that accurate information, you start to build a bridge. With that accurate information, you correct all of your perceptions. And that corrected perception, as we go about correcting the mind, you can't storm the gates. It takes time to do the work of changing the mind. It takes commitment. As you go through changing that mind, you then have the opportunity, because you're exercising your spiritual faculties, to build those faculties. So as you build them, by letting go of, by forgiving everything in your past that is less than love, you strengthen the spiritual muscles, so to speak, the spiritual faculties. And then, rather than experiencing life through your past, through your mind, you will have awakened the faculties with which to go directly to the experience of life and experience the way it really is. And that's the opportunity that comes in doing the overcoming process. At that point, and actually at every point, there's a really simple contract that we have with the creative power within us. That contract says, ask and you will receive. If we ask not knowing what we hold in our past, if we have no control over it, then we keep asking through our past and we keep asking for the same old stuff. It's not until we wake up to who we are and start to ask from the spiritual level, out of our true nature, that we can start to bring in a different experience of life. Now, when we were given this body-mind unit, it is an energy system that is meant to be alive. It's an energy system that was meant for life. However, when we hold energies that are unlike life, we disintegrate or we destroy the system. We literally break it down. Energy systems can't die. Their form can be changed by integrating energies into them that don't belong there. So the goal becomes letting go of the energies that don't belong there. But the fact is, because of blockage of personal error, they're invisible. What can you do when the energies that you need to deal with are invisible? The only thing you can do is learn to be responsible for every reality that you see, for every perception that you hold in your mind. As you learn to be responsible for those, then you have the opportunity to say, yes, this one's true, or it's not true. And if it's one I choose not to experience again, I have power over it. I have the ability to let it go, to forgive it, to cancel, to let loose of it. What's the purpose of life? Life is going to come along, and because its purpose is much like your energy system, life, anything that is less than life that you hold in your system, life is going to come along and try to get it to come to conscious awareness so that you can know what it is you're holding in your system. So that when you know it, when you're aware of it, if it's not what's appropriate for your system, you can let go of it. If it's sin, that is an energy that's less than your highest and best, you can learn by letting go of it that it's not what you want. And when you learn to let go of what's not what you want, you take another shot. You put a different quality of mind energy in. Another one of those buzzwords that's really been used to hold people into negativity, into their negative mind energy, and therefore keep setting up the same old circumstances, is the word evil. That's another one that in its initiation was meant to be positive feedback. On the archery ranges, when you fired at the target and missed, and you hit the bale of hay, you know what they called the bale of hay? You know what they called what you set up when you did less than your highest and best? When you sinned? It was called evil. So if we're living with something, if we've set up something in the effect world in our lives that is less than our highest and best, we're living with what was called evil. And the minute we recognize that, we can start to pull up the mind energy that doesn't belong there and let go of it. So the purpose of life is to show you what you're holding that's less than your true nature in your field. The purpose of life is to kick you right in the limitation and show you what you're holding on to. Now, the name for the conscious mind, in more traditional terms, is the alter. And I spell that A-L-T-E-R quite purposely. The conscious mind is where we can alter all of those old energies that we're holding that are less than life. We've got to bring them forward and look at them in order to process them out and release them, in order to liberate them. So waking up to our true nature is what leads to being able to put energies in that belong there. Now, if we hold an energy that doesn't belong there, and because of denial and suppression it's invisible, what are we going to do with it? What did we do with that little drawing that I put on the board? The fact is, by the way, that there are lines on a chalkboard. But each of us projected a meaning there. Instantaneously, our minds saw a meaning, and the meaning was what we held in our minds. The whole of life is a framework upon which we project a meaning. And the fact is, we see life the way we are, not the way life is. And it's not until we're willing to be responsible and bring forward those energies and that information to the altar that we can let go of it. If we're content to be stuck with our past, with the same old perceptions, then life will never change. Let's take that experience of stepping back from your mind a step further. A way of developing, or an important part of the process of developing awareness on the spiritual level, is being able to step back from your mind and observe. The experience where I asked you to put your right hand in your right ear, I'm going to change it just a little, and there's kind of a time delay here, and it gives you more time to observe your mind in operation. So if you would, step back from your mind and observe it in operation right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to put your hand, instead of put your right hand on your right ear, I'd like you to put your right hand on your gizzard. Would everybody do that? And what happens? If you're observing your mind, the thought process probably goes something like this. And let me see, gizzard. Chickens have a gizzard, and I think it's up here, or maybe it's down here. And do I have one, or just chickens? Notice you had to seek through your past in order to find the meaning of my words. If you keep going to your past for the meaning of life, of course, it's the same old thing. It's what I like to call SSDD. You seen that one? Same stuff, different day. When we start to wake up and change the meanings that our mind holds, then we can start to see life quite differently, and we don't have to be stuck with SSDD. Life becomes a totally different experience. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a demonstration. And I'd like 4 volunteers, please, to come up. Can I have 4 volunteers? And what I'd like you to do, if you would, is I'd like you to kind of stand right back here. And can I have a 5th volunteer? Would you give me a hand? And I'd like you to cooperate with the demonstration. Will you do that?
Sure.
Your name is Joyce?
Yes.
Okay, Joyce. See that door over there?
Yes.
What I'd like you to do, when I ask you to, will you head for the door?
Sure.
Okay, if you would just stand right here. Okay, now, would you mind going down and grabbing a hold of her ankles? And what I want you to do is hold them firmly to the floor. Good solid grip and hold on. And would you come over here and take a hold of an arm? Okay, got a good solid grip? Good. Okay, and would you grab the other arm? Good solid grip on the arm. Now I want you to hold on tight. Don't let her go anywhere. And would you hold on to her shoulders? Okay, good firm grip and hang tight.
The door, huh?
Now, what I want you to do is head for the door. Would you do that, please? Okay, we got it. You're not going anywhere, right?
No.
Now, we're going to change the experience just a little bit. Would you stand up? And what I'd like you four to do back there is join hands. And I'd like you to put an arm out here. And Joyce, would you take a hold of that arm in a good, solid, firm grip? Okay. And would you take a hold of that arm? You got a good, solid, firm grip? Mm-hmm. And now I'd like you to do the same thing in terms of following my instructions. Mm-hmm. I'd like you to head for the door. Would you do that? And you guys stay right where you are. Don't move. Head for the door.
I'm heading.
But Joyce, head for the door.
I am.
Okay. Notice that you have to actively hold on to your limitations for them to hold you back. Did I say anything about holding on, Joyce? Okay. No, head for the door. Oh, you're going to head for your seat. Okay. Thank you. The key there is that sometimes we develop habits. And notice it took about 30 seconds for Joyce to get the idea in her mind that her limitations were going to hold her back. And then, without any further instructions, she held herself back with them. And that's the way we all live. Now, when we first start letting go, forgiving, it can be kind of strange. Have you ever played the parlor game of holding onto a broomstick really tight for 2 minutes and then trying to open your hand? It's like those muscles just don't go. Well, sometimes our mental, emotional, and spiritual muscles become atrophied and they won't let go at first. It takes some practice to learn how to let go. And at first, it can be a little painful. Remember doing that, opening those muscles that have been there in one position for a long time? You know how it feels to get them moving? It can sometimes be a little painful. And it's the same on the level of those mental, emotional, and spiritual muscles. We need to learn how to let loose of those old mind energies in order to come to experience a new dimension of life, a new way of being. And further than that, when we put out a mind energy, when we take something from our past and hold on to it, we literally put an energy into the mind. And that energy which we put into the mind remains there throughout our lives. And it has some very dramatic effects on what happens in our lives. What is the effect of that mind energy that we hold on to? Well, first of all, if we turn to the sciences, we'll find that a whole new field of study opened up in the world of physics. Classical physics became outdated because in classical physics, physical things were physical things. Einstein came along and said, physical things aren't physical things. They're energy, organized into a form. And when we learn to release the energy, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of atomic power there, and it'll change the form of everything. Now, the physical world seems so real. Why? And our perception of it even more real. Why? Because we hold on to a past and we have an ego, an interpretation that comes from the past, we tend to stay locked into that past. The major attribute of the ego is called inertia. And if you remember the definition of inertia from school, it said that a body moving in a particular direction at a particular rate of speed will tend to continue to move in that direction at that rate of speed until it's acted upon by an outside force. The ego, because it is such a massive thought structure, remember that every thought you have ever thought is resident in your structure. And if you go back into the past, you'll find that not only your own thoughts, but the thoughts of the generations who have gone before you are also resident within your structure. We can go back into the world of botany, and we'll find that in one particular case, a plant called the prickly pear cactus, a gentleman named Luther Burbank, the prickly pear cactus. And he took this cactus out of the wild and brought it into the laboratory. And it took him 4 generations. And what he did was, he started to talk to the plant and tell it that it was in a safe environment and that it would no longer need spines. that he'd keep its predators from destroying it. And in 4 generations, he developed a strain of prickly pear cactus with no pricklies. If we go back into the Old Testament, we'll find the statement made, the sins of the father will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations. Now, when you start to think of that in terms of mind energy, the errors in thought, the energies that are less than the highest and best, and why they particularly? Because they're the ones that are emotionalized, and we all know what it is we don't want in our lives, don't we? So we have a big emotional deal about those mind energies. And they're the ones we tend to hold on to the tightest. So if we go back 4 generations, we'll find that those energies are resident in our genetic structure. Were you to conceive a child tomorrow, that child would have in its field every energy that you have ever thought or felt, unless you learn to let go of it. And one of the big reasons for forgiveness isn't just for you, but for the future generations. As you wake up and start to recognize those energies that are held in your system from the past, you learn how to let go of them, learn how to let loose of them. How massive is this thought structure? Well, if we look back and we look at 4 generations, if you count your life and mom and dad's mom and dad, etc., and add them all up, you come up with 31 lives. And if we listen to, well, let's say there's one estimate in psychology that says we think 50,000 thoughts an hour. So let's imagine we think 50,000 thoughts an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And the average in your 4 generations, the average lifespan is 80 years. If you multiply all of that out, you come up with 10,864,000,000,000 bits of information, pieces of information. Now that's a big chunk of information. That's a big past. And then remember that each of those pieces of information that you hold in your mind is a literal energy impressed on a brain cell. And remember that a brain cell is any cell in the body that has the capability of storing information. Now, there are 2 barriers here. There's one that separates the conscious mind from what's called the subconscious mind. And then there's another barrier that separates the subconscious mind from the unconscious mind. In the more traditional language, in the theological language, the word for the unconscious is the heart. You remember the statement was made, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he? Or maybe more importantly, take care the heart, for out of it are the issues of life. It is those energies, those masses of energy that we have accumulated at an unconscious level, a level that we're not aware of, a level that's difficult to touch into. It is that mass of energy that determines what is set up in our lives. So we each have this massive thought structure that coagulates on a conscious level as the ego. And that ego, with its perceptions, tends to keep us as spiritual beings unconscious. Unconscious of what? That which we have denied and therefore suppressed. Where is it going to show up? How are we ever going to get to see it in order to correct it if it's invisible because of our denial, because of our blockage of personal error? Well, there's an interesting and little-known faculty of the human mind which is called projection. What we deny and therefore suppress, that is, hide in ourselves, will show up when we project it on someone else. Remember we opened with the idea of the outer obnoxiousness? Why is it that the obnoxiousness always appears out there? Because of blockage of personal error and the way the mind functions, we won't allow ourselves to see our own errors. And so we see them in someone else. And it's not until we're willing to take back responsibility. Oh, if we keep them on the hook for it, everything's, well, you know, I'm not to blame here. But the fact is, while you're not to blame, you're never going to get free of it. The thing that seems threatening, which is taking responsibility, is the key to healing. It's the key to healing all of the mind energy that doesn't belong there, and it's the key to healing the physiological energy field and everything around us. As long as we're stuck in the ego's inertia, remember I talked about, gee, have you ever been in a seminar where you knew your life was going to change? Well, all the information you took in was just a little tiny dot compared to the 10 trillion bits of information that were there. And it didn't take long for that little tiny dot, as exciting as the mind energy was, to disappear into the unconscious level. And of course, there it didn't even make a dent. As we become conscious, we can continuously be committed to letting loose of our past so that we no longer have to live with the same old things that are a product of what we've held in our hearts. What effect do these energies held in the mind have in our life, in the world? Well, when we hold one of those bits of energy, some of that mind energy, in a brain cell, it's there and it's in a state of continuous motion. And anything that moves creates an energy field. Imagine that I'm standing underwater with a pail of water in my hand and I swing it around. You can easily imagine that the friction of the interaction between the pail and the water creates a wave that moves out in all directions, right? An energy moving in a brain cell creates a wave that moves out in all directions. Marcel Vogel, a 23-year senior scientist from IBM, has the instrumentation that takes the picture of this high-energy wave that leaves the mind when we think a thought. Not only the high-energy wave, but the high-energy particle. Now, if we listen to the nuclear physicists who are saying, gee, you know, this world that seems so solid and real is mostly space, and there are little tiny bits of energy whirring around, and the way that energy is organized, is what makes the world look like the world of form. And what they found is that there are two types of appearance of that energy. One of them is when it appears in its energy form, which is called a quantum wave, or quanta. An individual energy packet is called a quanta, and many of those waves are called quantum waves. The quantum waves we could look at as being the potentials in our life. Now, the way that the mind operates is through a law called the law of resonance. The law of resonance is a law of energy exchange. When I speak with my voice, I set up an energy, a vibration. If I say a word that triggers a brain cell in you, then you experience the result of what I've triggered in you. And there's no choice about that. For instance, for a moment, don't think about the color of your car. And of course, what happens? I just fired a brain cell. You can't not think about it. As you recognize that you can't not think about it, recognize that I just fired something from your past, and not only do you experience it consciously in the world of your perception, but you also experience it moving out into the world and creating an effect. Now, the quantum physicists tell us that this energy appears in two forms, and I'd like to read from the writing of a gentleman named Fred Alan Wolf. Fred Alan Wolf is a former professor of physics at San Diego State University and the University of Paris. And he writes, "The only mystery of quantum physics lies in the wave-particle duality described by Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. Atomic objects, like electrons, protons, and neutrons, etc., sometimes behave like particles and at other times like waves. When does an atomic object behave like a wave? And when does it behave like a particle? According to many quantum physicists," he writes, "the answer depends on whether or not the object is observed. The action of simple observation causes a wave to collapse, producing a particle." Now, what kind of action is simple observation? Nobel laureates Eugene Wigner, Brian Josephson, and many other physicists believe that it may be a fundamental event beyond physics. We view it, he says, as the action of consciousness. The behavior of atomic objects may depend on the wave-into-particle actions of consciousness. Without such actions, he writes, and recognize that this is writing coming from a hard physicist out of the laboratory. Without the action of the observer, the world and all of its participants would remain wispy, ghost-like quantum waves, and they would be nothing material at all. So it takes an observer. Now, when you recognize that the mind operates through a process called resonance, what do you suppose out of the vast world of potential you're going to experience in your life as your actuality? It's going to be that which you have sown into your field. Remember the statement was made, as you sow, you reap? Well, the energies that we put into our field radiate out from us, and of all of the potentials that are available, the one that it is in tune with or in resonance with, it adds energy to. And that which a moment ago was potential now has enough energy to collapse and become our actuality. So our reality, the internal experience, our perception, has a direct effect and influence on what we actually experience in the world. Just like with the multiple personality, when we will take charge of and make massive shifts in the mind energy that we hold, we will see massive shifts in the world. You'll recall that it was said that when we hold those energies, the world becomes as we observe it. There's only one way to change the world, and that's forgiveness.